in. I want to welcome everybody again to the second class of You're Not Alone. We started last week. If you missed last week and you're watching this recording, well, scroll down on our YouTube channel and you'll see last week's, and you can watch that recording from last week. Had a great kickoff, really great feedback from everyone. Different words that you've used to describe it. So I hope that continues this evening with our presentation tonight. I want to go ahead and tell you what to expect from tonight and then give you some housekeeping kind of things just to remind us of that, and then we'll jump right in. Tonight, Jason Champion is with us from Project Pride, and he's going to get us started in just a couple of minutes. And then I'll send you out into breakout rooms. And following the breakout rooms tonight, we have our people who are going to share their story. It's two. We have a couple who's going to share with us tonight. So that's exciting. And I'll introduce them. And following their time of sharing, then Laura Johnston that you see on the screen, who is a counselor with us at Samaritan, she will give our therapeutic response after that. And then I'm going to, instead of us doing open Q&A like we did last week, I'm going to send you out into a breakout room again. One feedback I had from last week was, can we have more discussion time? Yes, you can. So I will send you out into breakout rooms twice this evening. And I was asked earlier, like, how long are we in there? It's like you're in jail or something. When you go over there, last week I had it timed for 6 minutes. I let it run a little longer than that. So you're in there about 7 minutes. So I'm going to add a minute or so to the each breakout room. And the hope would be to double the amount of time you have for discussion. So we're just playing around. Like I mentioned last week, this is a pilot class. So we're playing around to try to tweak it every week to help it benefit you the most. So that'll be our plan for tonight. And you can give us feedback. Certainly, while anyone is sharing, continue to use the chat box to put questions or add comments, anything like that. I don't have a co-host on tonight, so I'll do my best to manage all of that and make sure we're acknowledging any questions or comments that you have. And I think that is all that I have for us, except just to say what our overall topic is for tonight. And then Jason and I are going to jump in and get started. Our topic tonight is similar to last week. It's just we're going to be much broader. Last week, we talked about finding and creating safety in faith communities or in your church. And so we're going to expand out tonight and just talk about finding and creating safety in community, just in general. And what I want to encourage all of us to think about, and this is where Jason and I are going to start, is all the possible definitions of community. If you just think about that, yeah, a church is a community, but your home can be a community, your workplace. So we're going to expand on that to get us started. And then Jason and I are going to dialogue. Actually, he and I are going to talk, sort of do an interview style versus him doing a presentation tonight. So that, again, is a little different. And we're going to roll in that. And then I'll put some questions up for your breakout time, and we'll roll into that following our talk. So, Jason, thanks for being with us tonight.
Hi, excited to be here.
If you would, just give us a brief introduction about your role at Project Pride, anything else you want to share before we dive into our conversation.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's excited to be here and share stories and talk about community. That's what I feel like I've done for the last 17 years that I've lived in Sarasota, was to try to build communities that are accepting, loving, and just overall a really good time. I am the board president of Project Pride in Sarasota. We were formed about 5 years ago for the need to build LGBTQ representation in Sarasota County, to speak out at school board meetings against politics, and just show representation within our community that we're professionals, we're attorneys, we're doctors, we're lawyers, we're actors, we're writers and performers. So when we can check all those boxes and change one heart, one mind at a time, is when we're winning.
And Jason, we may get into this a little bit more in detail in a moment, but earlier today when you and I were talking, you're like, well, I have a church history. Maybe I'll talk about that. Would you like to go ahead and touch on that now, or just as we weave into our conversation? What's better?
Sure. Sure. I grew up in a tiny little town in Mississippi called Grenada. I had 42 people from my graduating class from high school. So that should tell you about the size of what I went to school with and the people that I was with. But I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. That was family for us in a small town. It supported us, loved us, cared for us, and watched over us in many situations that could have been harmful to family and things along that line. So it was definitely a unique situation to grow up in a church environment and feel that acceptance and love and be represented within the community of people knowing that that's what the church we were from, what we were doing and what we represented. So it was nice. And you know, while there's a lot of institutions that teach religion and this is what it is, I had a 99-year-old grandmother that I could recite the books of the Bible backwards and forwards with her because that was my studies that I got to do. Along with, she really taught love and acceptance in a way that it was the golden rule. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. And that is what we live by on a daily basis. And again, it goes back to my statement of changing one heart, one mind at a time.
Thanks for sharing that. And in that story, Jason, you've given two illustrations of, well, three. You talked about the town you grew up in. Well, four. Sorry, they're adding up in my brain. You talked about your school, the size of your school, graduating class. So that's a community. You talked about your family a little bit there and your church. So that's four different illustrations of community. So let's keep defining that. When we think about community, big or small, what comes to mind as important to recognize when we're talking about community?
Yeah, I mean, community generally refers to a group of people who share common interest, characteristics, or goals, and who are connected by social, economic, cultural, or even geographic ties. It often involves a sense of belonging, as I talked about, mutual support, and sharing identity among its members. Community can be physical, such as a neighborhood or town, as referred to as talking about my hometown. And they could also be formed around shared interest, affiliations, or even virtual spaces, such as online communities. Look at our social media outbursts. There's many of things that you could find groups of to be involved with. The concept of just community really emphasizes the importance of social connections, cooperation, and a collective sense of identity and purpose.
Yeah, so as we all sit, if we can just sit in this for a second, that feels like a lot to take in, right? All of those different definitions of community. When we think about that, and this isn't a question yet, Jason, but when we think about that, there's some places where you can naturally feel more safe than in others. Is that fair to say, Jason?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as a outspoken gay leader here in town, there are definitely areas that I feel much more safe, protected, respected, and just in general, just respected in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. If I were to go to Arcadia, that could be a different situation. So it's a matter of being in communities that you feel accepted, respected, and continuing to thrive in those. And then again, expanding as that community gets tighter, it should expand to move its boundaries to accepting all.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about those places where you personally feel like that is a safe community for you, what does it take for you to feel safe in that community?
That is a subjective question because everybody can feel safe in different ways. I feel when I see peers professionally, I feel safe. I feel safe when I see other people within the LGBT community. I feel safe when I'm in an African American population or a Hispanic population, because it all comes down to love, right? And loving one another and respecting one another. You can be in any kind of situation and feel safe when you go back to the golden rule: do unto others as you would do unto yourself. And treating people equally at all times with no judgment is how I feel safe, because hostility shouldn't come back towards you if you're treating people in that manner. So everybody's definition is safe. I could also go on the flip side and say, I'm 6'2", 225. Come on, let's try this. But don't incite violence. But I definitely, I'm a little different from others, for sure.
So not to bring wound to the top of the conversation here, but if you could just think about a place, let's say in the last 5 years, if there was a place where you did not feel safe, what was it about that place that made you feel that way?
Another really good question, John. You can feel, I'm pretty intuitive in a lot of situations. And I think everybody on this call, gay, straight, black, white, green, purple, have been in situations where in their life they may have felt uncomfortable. And I think that goes for everyone. There could be situations where I could be in Sarasota and could be at a restaurant and feel uncomfortable because I could overhear the conversation next to someone speaking poorly of a different race or creed or sexual orientation. You could be in New York and feel the same way in one of the most diverse, educated cities in the country. It really just depends on tolerance and what you take as acceptance, I guess.
Yeah. So I want to zero in on the word intuition that you just used, because this is me just being curious. Do you feel like people are just naturally, born with that intuition, or is it something like a muscle that you exercise and it gets stronger?
That is a great question, because I think I can address that from a gay perspective. We grow up being what people want us to be and not necessarily what they are predetermined to be in life. There's never been a day in my life that I did not know I was gay, ever. I've always steadfast knew what I was, where I was going, and what my mission was. And I think gay people have that ability to be in a situation, fill that role that people are expecting from them, but intuitively they know it's going to be a different situation for them later in life. And so we grow up a shadow of ourselves until we're comfortable to be able to come out publicly and speak with our families. And then once that comes out, you've had an intuition built in of what people judge you automatically before they even can think of you, and before you can say anything. You're automatically have that intuition of, okay, if I act like this is the way they're going to feel about me. But if I act like myself, this is the way they're going to feel about me. So it's intuition of being able to move through audiences, per se, to have visibility, and intuitive of knowing I shouldn't be in those situations moving around.
All right, so I'm going to ask a question of everybody that I see your faces, and you can just do by show of hand. Jason just mentioned feeling like you have a shadow of yourself. How many of you have immediately, what he's talking about? Okay, I see maybe 3 or 4 hands, 5. Okay, 5 hands. Can you just talk a little bit more about that, Jason? Because I just wanted to ask that. If it looked like everybody raised their hand, then we don't need to dig into it. But when you say you feel like there's a challenge to have lived in the shadow of yourself, can you speak more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously as young children growing up, what you try to do is live in your parents' rules, regulations, and understand their morals, and you grasp onto those, and you build your life with what they're teaching you. But there may be something in the back of your head that this is not truly me, and you're not at that ability yet to be able to speak those words. It takes people different times in life to figure out if they're gay, straight, sometimes bisexual, transgender, whatever that you want to be. I think it takes a while for people to figure that out. So you live in an area trying to be that person everyone wants you to be. I know all the guys that are on this call, you all played football possibly, or sports in high school, because your parents wanted you to be a pro athlete, because they want you to do things they were not able to do. Some of you females that are on this, you were raised to be a homemaker, when that maybe not be what your path was, that you're independent, strong women that got a career and went and worked and challenged the norm every day. I think there is just different things in each one of our lives, gay, straight, black, white, green, purple, that you live in a way that's almost a shadow of yourself sometimes, to be in the circles that you're trying to be in, or what you were raised in. And so every one of us have had some sort of shadowing in our lives of who you are, of who you really are, because it takes a long time to be yourself. And I say this in knowing that I was a gay child growing up in the state of Mississippi, with 23 kids in my kindergarten class, with 20 more coming on my senior year. By the time we were all together, it was time we needed to go to college and get away from each other. But you grow up in environments that this is what you're supposed to be. And while and you try to live up to those expectations, and until you honestly get to a point sometimes to where you're like, I can't do that. That's not me. And I have to find a way to express who I am, or be what I am. Because, and I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges for me and my family was not necessarily me coming out. It was the fact that I went to school, college, on athletic scholarship, and my dad wanted me to be a banker. I hate numbers. I still don't know how to multiply 10 by 12 or 9 by 12. I mean, it drives me insane. I wanted to be an interior designer. I wanted to work in the arts. And my first 2 years of school was the biggest struggle. And I had the lowest GPA. I got kicked out of the fraternity because I was horrible at school. And I begged my parents, please let me change to design school. When I changed to design school, I graduated valedictorian with a 4.2 GPA average, because it was natural. It came right to me, and I knew that's what I needed to be doing. But there was a struggle there. And so every one of us have been through struggles like that to get to where you want to be.
Wow, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. I'm glad we had that part of the conversation. I'm going to shift us now to thinking about what it means to build and protect community, safe community. And again, I know we're trying to think about church, but let's keep that as broad as possible in our brains, everybody. So Jason, what does it take to build and protect, let's say, a business environment, or, anything that using the golden rule, go back to that. That's one example. What are other ways to build and protect a community that LGBTQ people know this is a safe place?
It's hard work. And it doesn't have to be necessarily an LGBTQ community. It doesn't have to be that at all. It can be any community. And building any community takes blood, sweat, tears, and a lot of effort from people that have energy to make a change and do better. About 4 years ago, myself and 2 other guys got together, and we formed the SRQ LGBTQ Kickball League here in town. Our first season, we played downtown in Pioneer Park. Not safe at all. Not for crime, but for the park was uneven. People were getting hurt. Like it was just not the best of fields to be playing on. We started with 29 people. We ended this last season with 165 people in the league. That is an incredible amount of growth in a short period of time. And it was that people showed up, they felt respected, they felt included. We have gay, straight, bi, trans in the league, and there was never been a time where there were cross words used between anybody. It was the most easy elementary playground sport we could put together, still with the big red rubber ball, to get out and be competitive, build community and fellowship. And that is what we did with that. And we have a successful league because of that. Everyone feels included.
So is it fair to say that maybe we're overcomplicating it?
Yes, every day. Every day, the media overcomplicates everything. Social media overcomplicates everything. We as individuals overthink everything way too much. Sometimes it's much easier to be nice and just smile. If you look at the facts, it is more muscles to frown than there are to smile.
Right.
And when you can just put a smile on your face and understand that that person that's walking towards you or in a conversation that you're having with is probably going through thick mud, like we're all walking through with army boots on sometimes. And you've just got to go to that level and have a level of empathy and understanding that you can work with people on a daily basis. I get put into school board meetings where it's been nothing but fire for the last year and a half speaking. And it is, I get horrible, nasty emails that are sent to me after speeches that I do, degrading me, calling me a hypocrite. I'm not the hypocrite, but all of that kind of stuff. And it's just, I reply back with kindness of, if you're willing to meet me for coffee, let's sit down and talk about this, because there are things that we do have in common. And if we can sit down and find that commonality in some of these conversations, that could start a relationship. And building that relationship means one heart, one mind at a time, because that person then will go and sit and talk to someone else and say, yeah, he didn't show up wearing a wig. He didn't come in screaming, this is what I expect for life, and this is what I'm owed. That is where we can live and build a relationship with people, regardless of what spectrum that you're on, political, emotional, physical, whatever. You can have a conversation with people and find commonality.
Pastor Bill, I just saw your question. I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll address that one. So you just gave a really great illustration of building safe community. What is it? And I know you said it's hard work, but what is it that's necessary to protect that community as it's being built and once it's been built? How do you protect it?
You give each member of that community the respect, which empowers them to protect not only themselves, but the others that are around them. And when you build a team of 8 people to play kickball and you respect each one of them, they're looking out for the other 7. And then when you get 2 teams together, you're looking at the other 16 that are looking out for you. And it's building that everyday repetition, communication, respect for each other. And it comes naturally. You don't have to think about how you got to protect each other and save each other. You're there. You're there to help pick them up when they fall. You're there to help support them when they're playing well and praise them when they're doing great.
Excellent. So we have a question from Pastor Bill at Pine Shores. And Jason, he's wondering, how would you compare the welcome or not of Sarasota compared to other cities of the same size?
Sarasota is challenging right now. The state of Florida is challenging right now. I mean, let's just start with that. And that's not just against LGBT community. That's against women's rights. It's against African Americans. It's against a lot of people right now. And so to open the doors and be respectful of the people that walked in with no judgment of where they came from and what they're doing, but they came to find solace within a group, is how you make us acceptable and successful in all communities of all sizes around this country.
Well, we could talk a long time, Jason, and he and I both said earlier, 20 minutes is going to go really fast for
Yep.
us. That time is going fast, but I'm going to send you into your breakout rooms. But before I do that, let me show you the same two questions we used last week before you go into your breakout room, and just what hit home for you in as you've been listening to Jason in the last few minutes. And if you had a biggest takeaway, you might have several, but whatever your biggest takeaway is, those are the two questions to help you guide your, well, at least start your conversation. And, of course, where it goes from there is up to you. I have 4 breakout rooms tonight. Erin's going to facilitate one. KK's on the call. She's going to facilitate the one for Harvest. Pastor Bill, if you will, again, help those in Pine Shores who come in your room. And then the 4th one is just labeled community. And I'm going to ask Bill Clough, do you mind facilitating that conversation in the community room? Okay, awesome.
No problema.
Thank you, sir. So I'm going to launch the rooms, and just like y'all did last week, pick the room that you would like to go into. You don't have to go in your own church community by any means. Go wherever you would like. And you'll have about 9 minutes to discuss. Enjoy.
Almost.
Yeah, all good. You're welcome to stay on if you'd like.
Yeah, I actually would love to hear what they come back with.
Yeah.
I think that was a good conversation. I hope it sounded okay and I gave good answers.
Yeah, no doubt. And by the way, if you're watching this recording, feel free to go ahead and forward, 8 minutes or so. Jason and I may sit here and chat a little bit. Yep. Let's do that just for the sake of those who are watching the recording.
Okay.
Did you have anything in mind, by the way, that we didn't touch on that like I hope I had wished to say this and we didn't bring it up? Anything like that?
No, I think, I gave some good talking points for them to discuss. And I think we kind of touched on everything. I got to talk a little bit about my background, history in Sarasota. I touched a little bit on politics, which, it is what it is.
Right.
And then just giving people the knowledge and empowerment to go build communities. I mean, it's hard work, but once you do and you see that success from people showing up and sharing friendships and building relationships out of that, it makes everything else that's going on right now in the world a little more tolerable and a little more easy, that knowing that, hey, guess what? Every Saturday morning I'm gonna see these folks and we're gonna get out and be competitive with each other, and we're gonna play and sweat and have a good time and build that camaraderie. And I think that's really what I hope that I can inspire people to do, and live authentically, because it does make it easier.
So as I'm listening, Jason, to me, there always has to be something that drives someone to have that. Well, frankly, you're talking about courage, right? To stand up and speak for yourself or speak on the behalf of others or do hard things or do things that other people, either don't have the energy to or just aren't going to bother, whatever, all the things. Yeah, the gold rule may be at that, but is there anything else you would say that just drives you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a family that was very competitive in sports. My father went on athletic scholarship to college. Both my brother, my sister, and I all went to college on athletic scholarship. So the competitive drive to compete is definitely something that is inherent to me. Like I just have that, and I have that in everything from playing cornhole to my job to
Right.
eating a hot dog. Like
Yeah.
I've got to be the best at what it is, and that's what I strive to do. And I want to build communities of people that can learn lessons like what I learned through sports, because most folks don't play sports and they don't play competitively in a situation like that. And what that taught me was teamwork in a lot of those situations, which helps me be collaborative in my career and building relationships that way. And if we can do that through a playground game of kickball, that people start to talk again, people start to communicate with each other, and they start to become friends. That's how we build long-term communities that want to be together and do stuff. And right now we have to build those communities because everything every day is wanting us to be divided. Everything from going to Publix of buy one get one to do you want to buy one on regular price? They're fighting you right there. That they're starting it, and to watch the news, it's this group hates this group and this group hates this group, and it just you can't get away from that. So you have to kind of build your own world. And building that world is what I've wanted to do for a long time, and everyone feel included. Because one thing that outside of my very deep entrenched Southern religious grandmother, there was not a day that she wouldn't give back what she earned. And every day it was do unto others, and then you give back as much as you get. And that could be emotionally, physically, financially, whatever that it may be, you give back as much as you do. I mean, so I work in a philanthropic career. I work with thousands of nonprofits around this country, teaching them how to fundraise because they were all built out of social issues that needed to be addressed. And if I can help them raise money for that, every day I can lay my head down knowing that I have done something to change the world for better.
Well, you just said a word that I was going to hit on, change. Thinking of, some people like to call themselves agents of change these days, which, take it or leave that title. But as I was listening to you, I could see calling this mindset an agent of unity instead of, embracing the division. How can I be someone that creates unity? Does that sound fair to describe?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely fair. I mean, I've been called an agent of change. I've been called a disruptor. I mean, I've been called all of those. I love the word to use, the unity, because that's truly, it goes back to what I was talking about. I mean, these emails and phone calls and texts that I will get that are just horrific. Like it is what it is. It doesn't really affect me, but you reply back, hey, would you be willing to go meet for coffee? And let's see. Am I putting myself in a vulnerable situation? Absolutely. Are they? Yeah. And to have both show up at the same time shows that people are good. People do want to do better. And maybe it's just a sitting down and having a conversation to change their mind.
All right, so I'm closing these rooms. So let's do the whole. I grew up in Alabama. You grew up in Mississippi.
Yep.
From the college sports world, you have to make a choice. Well, in Alabama, you have to make a choice.
Right.
There's only two options. Was that the way it was in Mississippi?
Ole Miss or Mississippi State.
Right.
I went to Ole Miss.
There you go. And all 4 years you finished there, and okay.
4.5.
We don't talk about the half or whatever.
I was having a great time.
No, that's awesome. Well, thanks for continuing to chat for those in the recording. This is great.
Jason, I didn't know you went to Ole Miss. Do you happen to know someone named Alan Ferris?
I know the last name Ferris. How old is he?
I don't know, but he went to Ole Miss. He was our tech director at our church forever ago, and he's wild. So
Gotcha. Well, that's typical from us Ole Miss, Mississippi boys.
I love it.
So I'm going to err on the side of what do I want to call this? Maybe eating into some other time. But let me just ask Aaron from your breakout room. Just list one item that stood out to you from the discussion. Anything that stands out?
Just the contact of one heart at a time, one conversation, one personal interaction at a time is the way to help build community.
Awesome. Oop, somebody must have got booted out. Got to let him back in. All right. I want to protect time and hopefully have enough time to send you into a breakout room again at the end of our next segments here. So I want to introduce our couple that's going to share this evening. Let me make sure I see that. Yeah. Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing another personal story. Last week, Luke. Okay. They're having a problem with their camera. So I'll keep yakking till they get their camera up and running. Last week we had a great illustration from Luke from Peace Press sharing about his story. And tonight we have some ladies who attend Harvest, and they're actually both psychologists, which I just learned that this week. It's like, oh, we got to step up our game. I'm teasing, but Dr. Emily and Dr. Essence are with us, and I think they're having some camera issues. So we're going to give them a couple seconds to get that figured out, and then they're going to share with us their story. There we go.
Okay. Hi.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No, all good. I ad-libbed who you could get on. You guys ready?
Yes. Thank you
Okay,
for
awesome.
stalling for us.
Yes,
You're welcome. Look forward to hearing your story. So take it away from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll give a little kind of like personal context to like our individual journeys. And then we'll kind of talk about like our couple journey of finding a church and navigating church community as a queer couple. So I grew up in Sarasota. I've lived here pretty much my whole life. I grew up Catholic, and I was raised within like the church. I was an altar server. I did like all the things a good Catholic was supposed to do. And throughout like my journey, I had like a very interesting dichotomy in how my parents taught me love and acceptance and the messaging that I was getting a lot from like the church and what I was reading about the Catholic Church. And I remember like as I was growing up, I had friends who came out to me, and my parents were always like, oh yeah, we love them, we love and accept them, like that doesn't change who they are to us. And at this point I didn't realize my identity yet, and so I was like, okay, awesome, like I have all this community of my family telling me that like this is great, and then I'm having kind of like the messaging from the church that it's a problem. And I kind of continued to live through most of my life, like through high school and everything like that, kind of dealing with that messaging and trying like very hard to reconcile like how I felt about social justice issues and what I was hearing in the church. And I think in some ways like I was pretty protected from the church that I was in. It was not progressive, but they didn't really go after like kind of hot topic issues in homilies. They kept it kind of more focused on the church and less on the politics. But I couldn't ever like really get past the messaging I was hearing outside of church for a lot of things. And I remember at one point I was like an altar server, and a bishop came to our church, and I was like one of the most used altar servers in the church, and I was told that like I was not allowed to be on the altar. I was not allowed to touch any of the bishop's like regalia because I was a woman, and that a man was only allowed to touch those things. And that was one of like the first times I was like, whoa, like it kind of smacked me hard in the face that it was about me and not about someone else, and that I couldn't like quite reconcile the issues that I was having with. And so I kind of, when I went to college, I distanced myself a little bit from going to mass regularly. But it was a part that I was missing. I missed a level of like the community, and we just talked about how important like community is. I was missing elements of it. And through grad school, I continued to kind of like shop churches. I'm sure we're all like know the idea of like, we'll go here and just kind of feel it out and hope we land somewhere that feels good. And I finally found one where I was going to grad school, and it was the first time I'd ever seen an openly gay couple in a Catholic church. And they weren't just like sitting in the back, they were sitting like front row. The pastor or the Monsignor would go and hug them every time they were in church. Like, it was one of the first times I'd ever seen a Catholic church be so openly accepting of a queer couple. And it kind of like gave me hope. And I was like, okay, there's churches out there that look like that. And I left that church when I finished up grad school, and I came back to Florida, and I continued like the church shopping process, which is really difficult when you find a church you like, because then you're leaving like that community and that safety and that representation. And through all of that, I continued to like not really find another church like that was open and accepting of just people who were different or didn't fit like kind of like the perfect Catholic mold. And then that is when I met Essence, and we started kind of like our journey together. But I'll let her give the background on her journey.
Yeah, so I can give a little bit about kind of, I'm like on the tiniest stool, so I'm really not this much shorter than Emily, but it definitely looks like it. But I grew up in church. I'm biracial, and so one of the things that my parents had to figure out was they came from very different faith backgrounds, but faith was a value to both of them. And so when I was little, we went to a Baptist church that was predominantly Black. And I mean, we really liked it. People were nice to me. People were nice to my dad. My dad sang in the choir, but we ended up leaving because of the way that my mom was treated. She wasn't really like, if they would say hi to everybody, like there were some women or older people that like wouldn't say hi to her because of their views about interracial marriages and different things like that. So my parents ended up like, we left the church because they wanted a place where we all felt like we belonged. And so I was playing soccer, and my dad was coaching soccer when we met a family who, her dad was a pastor of a church that was really close to like where we were having our soccer games. So we tried out going there, and that was like the complete opposite. It was part of the conservative Mennonite conference, like way on the other side, if any of you are familiar with the Mennonites. So it was like a big culture shock, but we stayed there for a while, and that was a place where my dad and my sisters and I were like the only people of color. Like there were a few like maybe people that were Asian or something like that, but nobody that was like Black like that. And so we kind of went from one world to the other where we were just not represented in a different way in that church. But there weren't as many like issues or like very like blatant signs that they didn't accept us or whatever, so we kind of like stayed there. And my dad made his decision that he wanted to become a pastor around that time, but he was also in the process of becoming a psychologist around that time. And so we actually moved for his residency to Pennsylvania for a year, and I mean that could be its own story. But one of the coolest things about that was that we went to a church that was like the first time I had seen so much diversity in a church. Like there were so many different looking people that had all come together. It was like right in the middle of like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and the church was really plugged into the community, and they did so much stuff that I had always thought of like Jesus doing, like feeding people and going out and being nice and welcoming, you know, like the really difficult things for churches. But it was just like incredible. And I remember being like 10 years old, and I was like, yes, like I like church. This is exactly what I want. And so fast forward, we ended up not staying there, and we moved back to Ohio where I grew up, and went back to that same church that we had gone to before we moved. And I think, like you said, when you find a good church and then you go to a church that's not as like good of a fit for you, you feel it. And so at that point, I was like entering middle school, and so were all of my friends. But, you know, middle school's rough. And all of those differences and like comparing myself to my peers and comparing myself to the people around me were just like elevated. in that situation. I had a lot of friends that were homeschooled or Christian schooled. I was like the only public schooler in my church group. And a lot of the like normal developmental things that you do as a middle schooler, like having crushes and kissing people, were things that people, you know, my friends were telling me like I wasn't a good Christian, or there was something wrong with me, or I was like creating traps for boys, or, you know, the things that people say. And I was just, they were so engulfed in like that purity culture. And then when I was doing things that made sense around some of my friends, other parts of my community were telling me that I was like the worst thing ever. And so there was just this like chronic feeling that like I was always doing something wrong, no matter where I went. And I had to switch how I felt depending on who I was around. And so my dad became a pastor. If you have a parent that's a pastor, you know that that is like a whole different world in terms of what people then feel like they should comment about or be concerned about compared to normal church members. So I kind of just became like a person that people had a lot of like concerns about. And even though like life phases changed, the sentiment was the same, that like I was wrong. So in high school, it was I was wrong for how I talked about my faith. In college, it was wrong for how the college that I went to, or the organizations that I chose to get involved in, or how I viewed the world. When elections started and I was able to vote and talk about my perspective on social justice, that was a problem. In 2020, when there was the pandemic and when George Floyd was murdered and all of those things, I had people that were telling me how divisive I was and how such a bad Christian I was and all of these things. So just kind of like throughout all of those things, as much as I wanted to be connected with church, there were so many reasons that I like wanted nothing to do with it. So I moved to Florida in 2020. It's like still lockdown time for my residency. And at that point, I was like, perfect. I'm far away from my parents, so they can't be upset if I don't go to church. Like, I just need a break. So I just decided at that point that like I needed a pause. So I took about a year where maybe I would like read my Bible, or I would, you know, I still had some friends from the church, but like I was good. I couldn't go back into that environment. It made me anxious. It was just like not it. And right around the time that I was like, okay, I'm ready to start doing this process again, is when Emily joined the program. That's how we met. So that's when you came on the scene.
Mhm.
I remember one of our very first conversations. We like went out to dinner as a cohort, and I was like, does anybody go to church? Like, do you guys do that? Because I was looking for people that would maybe want to go with me. And I remember Emily was like, I do, but I'm Catholic. And I was like, oh my God, like, I'm not doing that. Like, don't worry. I guess we're going to have to go to different churches. So that's kind of when we met both of our faith journeys.
Mhm.
We're going to have to skip over a lot of stuff about how we ended up in this relationship.
Yeah.
That's a story for another day. So I guess fast forward, we became really good friends.
Mhm.
And then we kind of like fell into dating, as
Yeah.
people do. What would you say would be
Yeah,
there?
I would say like at that point, as we started to talk more seriously about like our relationship and like what building kind of a stable, committed relationship looked like, church came up a lot. As we were like bettering ourselves and noticing that we were having a lot of like positive changes, we felt like we were missing something. That there was some piece that we weren't quite like kind of connecting with. And so we talked about church, and it started out, I think, as more we were like doing Bible studies together, we were reading devotionals. We hadn't quite figured out how to reconcile the differences in like the church communities that we grew up in. At times you would come home to visit my parents with me, and you would come to the Catholic church, and we'd almost always have to have a debrief at the end about like the things you liked, the things you didn't like, the things that were both triggering. I remember the first time Essence came home with me and we went to church together, the homily included like how being gay was a sin, and how like we were going to hell. And I remember like almost crying in church, because I didn't come out until I maybe like 3-4 years ago. And so at that point, like that was one of the first times I had truly been exposed to like someone actively like kind of pointing at me and saying like, your choices are bad, you're going to hell.
At your home church.
Yeah, at the church that I had felt really safe in, and I knew the pastor really well. And so that I think sparked a lot of conversations about us finding a church community that felt really safe, and that we wouldn't have to like pretend that we were friends in, or pretend that like she was just like a random person I brought to church with me.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
very weird, I think, going with a family.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we're very clearly not siblings.
Yeah.
And Sarasota's very white. And so like it was very clear that like there was something. And I was already so uncomfortable because I'm not Catholic. So there's a lot of rules about like what you're allowed to do if you're Catholic or if you're not. And it was the first time I had ever been in there. I got COVID. It was just like a whole ordeal the first time that I stepped into the Catholic Church, and I was like, dude, like I can't do it. I don't like it. And I know that you like it, and that's important. So we were like trying to kind of figure out like how are we gonna alternate like Sundays? Like how is this gonna work? And I would take Emily home with me. And at this point, my parents had left the church that I was talking about before and joined like a newer church. And I hadn't gone to it, but I took Emily. And what do you know? A message about how all the gays are going to hell. And it's like we had never had this, and now we're like really trying to like get back plugged in, and it's almost as if God was like nah, like here is your sign that like this is not it. And it was really discouraging. Like we were like it was something where I was like, am I gonna have to like give this up? Is this really like not going to be a part of my life? Because like I think at that point we were like so bought into the relationship that we weren't willing to give up what we had all the other days of the week for Sunday. And so it was a really rough period of time, I think. And at some point we decided that we were going to try some stuff when we were still living in West Palm Beach. And so we were shopping and we would go to churches, and I took Emily to like a mega church. There was like a smoke machine, you know, like if you're evangelical, you know what I'm talking about. And she was like, this is a lot. This is a lot.
That was my first time ever not in a Catholic church in like my adult life. And so I went from like most Catholic masses are relatively like somber. You might like get something other than an organ thrown in there every so often. And then I like walk into like a stadium with like electric guitars and fog machines. And I was like, it was a culture shock. And I think that is something in our journey is like talking about we're allowed to like have reactions and it not be digging on how each of us were brought up within the church, and that we're not attacking how someone chooses to like worship, but we're really finding the thing that like speaks to us and how we want to worship and the way that like we feel connected to God. And so I think through that we continued to like find churches, and we went to one pretty consistently, but it always felt like we were holding our
You
breath.
need to say the location of that church.
So the church,
I think that's an important detail for the viewer.
from the window of the church, you could see Mar-a-Lago, straight across the bay in West Palm Beach. And we were like, okay, like they can't help their location. And then we were sitting and we were just kind of like hearing some messages, and we were like, is this the moment? Like, is this the moment they lose us? And then at one point in time, they lauded having the former president who lives at Mar-a-Lago and how amazing it was to have him sitting in the pews at one point in a prior service, and talking about, you know, just what an honor and all these things. And I think at that point, it really kind of clicked for us that like, we could not fully be who we wanted to be and worship and praise and be all the elements of us, that we had to start toning down parts of us to be in church. And that was a very difficult conversation for us to have about like what that looked like for a sustainable future.
Yeah, like we would go and like, you know, Emily is a hand holder, and like we wouldn't hold hands, and we have like matching shoes, and we'd be like, okay, does it look like we're like together if we both wear these shoes? Just like it was very anxiety provoking, where like rather than being in church and thinking about God and about our weeks and that kind of stuff, we were like looking for cues that something was going to tell us that we didn't belong. And so we kind of gave up on it. We were like, you know what, like all right, we'll figure this out. We knew we weren't going to stay there, living there. So we were like, well, when we move, then we'll try it again. We'll be somewhere else, and like, hopefully it works out for us. Yeah, but right around that time, I think, is when you saw the TikTok.
Yeah, so at that point we were just we were looking for almost anything. Like we'll live stream a church, we don't care. Like we want some level of community. And that's when we came across a spoken word that Harvested, that KK was a part of. And we saw that and we were like, oh, places like this exist. And then we like clicked on it. We're like, oh, that's in Sarasota. We're moving, like I'm moving back to Sarasota and you're moving there. And we're like, okay, this is like, it made it seem like we didn't have to compromise anymore. That as Jason, you said, like it doesn't have to be that hard. We don't have to piecemeal stuff together in order to find a place. Like there really are in communities that look like that. So then we walked into Harvest for the first time, and that was the first time I had seen more than one queer couple in a church space. That was the first time I had ever seen like queer couples openly showing like affection in church. And that like the number of queer couples to like straight presenting couples was almost 50-50. That was one of the first times I had ever seen that. And it kind of blew my mind.
And the racial diversity has always been a thing for me as well. Like growing up, like I always felt like I identified with like one half of me. And so walking into Harvest too, I was like, oh my gosh, look at all the interracial couples. Like I just felt very seen in all of the people that were there. And we both had our guards up. We were like, okay, like yeah, it looks nice. Anybody can put on a website that like they're affirming, and like we kind of feel good about them, but who knows? You have to sit through the whole service, to really know. And before they even really started anything, Dan stood up and said, like, before we get into anything, we want to let you know that we believe that clarity is kindness. And so you don't have to sit through the whole service before we tell you that like you're welcome here as you are. If you've been marginalized by the church, that's not what's going to happen here. We celebrate you, and we like want you here and everything like that. And I was able to do church. Like I was like, okay, like that's what I needed. To let my guard down and to like sit in this and see what's gonna happen. And I think we both just kind of relaxed, and we saw people like holding hands, and we saw Aaron and Jill on the front row, and I was like, this is weird. Like there are really people like us that love God like us, that love each other like us, and like they're all right here in this room, and like it's okay. And we just kind of looked at each other, and I think we kind of knew like, okay, great. But we got in the car and I just sobbed like the whole ride home. I'm just crying. And Emily's like driving, trying to comfort me, like it's okay. But it was just such a healing moment, I think, that first time to be able to exist and to be like good enough just as we were, without having to do anything, without having to turn anything up or turn anything down or pretend or fake it or lie or anything like that. Like we just got to exist. And I think since we went, like we've continued to go and make relationships and everything like that. And I think as psychologists, we sit here each day and we both work with like the queer community and people that have lost hope and don't have communities and feel ostracized or rejected, or that like they're not good enough, and all of these things. And I think one of the hardest things for me has been that like there aren't more churches like what we have been able to find, to be able to say like just go to church or just do this or just do that. Like there isn't a clear solution for everybody. And I think since going to Harvest, that has really put it on both of our hearts to like create more spaces like this one and to contribute and participate and support places that are like trying to make this work between faith and sexuality and just differences as a whole, because we needed it and we found it, and it has been like so incredibly life-changing. So I mean, That's what I got. Do you have
Yeah.
anything to add?
No, I think it's just like I think a couple years ago, I don't even think I could have like fathomed having a space like our classes right here, where like faith and the LGBTQ plus community are like so intertwined, and it's like not a question of if people are coming in here to be like affirming and supportive. It's like, how do we do better for our community? And I don't think I could have seen that without like doing the work and finding spaces and finding churches and knowing like it's so nice to know like there's other churches in our community like Harvest who are making sure like that the voice is heard and that there's space and like community, and that however like you connect with God, like it's not you have to like go to the one church in town who's open and affirming, that like you can worship however you want to worship and find connection however you want to find connection. It just like it makes me feel like there's going to be more of this hopefully in the future that makes it easier for us to connect. Our clients was saying like we encourage like all of our people, like don't mince your boundaries, don't mince your expectations because you think that's as good as you're going to get. And I think we do that, and I did that with like my church journey until I saw that there was like something else out there. So it's heartwarming to know that.
Well, thank you, ladies. What a great story. There's lots of things we could keep talking about, but I appreciate you sharing your individual stories, but your story as a couple, and sharing how you landed at Harvest. For time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and invite Laura Johnston to give a quick reply here, and I will try to send you off into a breakout room. I had sent some questions to you, Laura, about therapeutic response, but whatever you feel led to share here before we go out into a breakout room. By the way, Laura is our clinical director at Samaritan and has been on staff with us as a clinician for quite a few years. So thanks for being here tonight, Laura.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. I'm going to be quick because I don't want to take up time. But some of the things that stood out for me, comparing what's been talked about in counseling and the counseling process, I love the idea of one heart and one mind at a time. And then 4 things stood out: safety, individualization, love, and equality. Safety in the sense that the counseling office or Zoom is a safe place to speak and be heard and to be your whole self, not just a shadow of yourself, as Jason was talking about, feeling like a shadow of oneself. The counselors will ask more questions, will have more questions than answers. And it's about getting to know you and your particular story as an individual. The process is client-led in the sense that the counselor's not going to say, here are the 3 things you need to work on. It's very collaborative. And what do you want to work on? What do you want to talk about? What's on your mind? And then love, the fancy therapeutic term is unconditional positive regard, is one of the foundational pieces of my style of doing counseling. I love Carl Rogers and his ideas. And then also equality was brought up as something that's important in building community. And I think counseling is a situation where there's equality. I don't see it as, the counselor's the teacher and the client is here to learn or anything like that with a hierarchy. I really see it more as an equal collaboration. And then I had a quote from Rogers, but I'm going to skip that in the interest of time.
Well, thanks. I had questions that I was going to throw on the screen, but y'all have plenty to talk about. You don't need prompts from me. So I'm going to send you back into your breakout rooms, and we'll shorten the time a little bit here. I'll just stop you when we need to come back. All right. So off you go, and we'll see you back in about 5 minutes. All right.